I mean, that's sort of key question, I guess. If we're trying to win the millennials, what do you think their take is on this? I mean, here we are, we're sitting here, we're thinking, okay, we know there's a drought of people coming under 35. Is there something here we particularly need to be thinking about?
I was going to say, I think stories have been told about us. Yeah. So if you go to the millennials and you ask, what do you think about Christians? There is no way that you could be a Christian, because the story is Christians are brain dead, they're homophobic, they're transphobic, and they have no insight into the world as it is. And we've been silent. We haven't been speaking positively. We haven't been countering those images. The reality is that Christians do some brilliant things in some brilliant areas, but we have not been telling the stories, nor even the big story that John's been alluding to. We've become the victim of our own passivity.
You see, it's interesting, isn't it? I always think that when I was at the same school as Alan Turing, so the guy who did the Enigma machine, and you know, maybe saved 40 million lives and shortened the war by 2 years. But of course, he was pursued to his death, really. By 1954, he was dead because he was a homosexual and a practicing homosexual. And actually, what I always think is it's learning that thing of realizing people are rebels. Alan Turing made wrong choices, but at the same time, he's a victim. And we as a church haven't necessarily heard that story. So to hear that story and be able to understand, is that right, that people are victims as well as rebels, and teach our people to discern the two, teach others to, is that?
I think that is exactly right. So sin is enslaving. Sin is both wrongdoing, but it's also enslaving. Yeah. And the Bible would talk about sin not just as wrong things we do that deserve God's judgment, but as being in slavery to Satan and his rule over us. And I think that aspect of the human condition is one that evangelicals have tended to underplay in favour of a kind of a legal, juridical model of the guilt that comes from sin. And it's not that it's either or, it's actually both and in the Bible. And sin has all of those dimensions. So yes, people are both wicked perpetrators, but they're actually also victims who have been enslaved. The gospel frees from both. And we need to be able to, in a sense, speak of sin and its consequences in that holistic way.
It's interesting on Life Explored, every week with the little film we've done, which opens up, which is the film of different lives. We basically are doing each week, look, can you see you're in the pigsty? So we've taken the most famous short story and said, look, you're in a pigsty, and can you see the famine coming? So we're praying that people who come and see these silent movies will see themselves with the good things they worship becoming God things and destroying them. So it's that sense of it being enslaving, and hoping people will say, gosh, that's what this is doing. Now then we are desperate to get people to see, look, this is all a subsection of being a rebel against God, and you need to seek his forgiveness. But the way in is idolatry, not law breaking. Yeah.
And part of the way in also with the story is that we are made in the image of God. We know we are made for something more. There is an ache within the human soul, and people are asking questions. They are expecting things that the world isn't delivering. And so we see them getting answers at times in the wrong places. And we immediately go in and say, that's wrong, rather than say, let's honour the question. Let's start with the question. Let's start with the ache that they've got. And let's work that out, because yes, we are made for something bigger and better, and that is only going to find its satisfaction in Christ. But let's be gracious enough and merciful enough that we start with the questions they are asking, rather than the decisions they make, the wrong decisions they make in the light of those questions.
I think one of the illustrations of the difference between story and proposition and how that works out, actually the recent debate on abortion in the Irish Republic is a classic of that. Those who wanted to retain the restrictions on abortion generally made reasoned propositional arguments. Life begins at conception, it's wrong to have abortions. Those who were in favour of introducing changes in abortion generally told the stories of women who had been pregnant, maybe those who had been raped, those who had children with very significant sort of medical conditions that meant that they could not survive, and it was then communicated around the pain of those individual circumstances. And I think in the cultural argument, those stories were far more winning than the logical proposition of what you might believe about how life begun. And I think sometimes as Christians, we come across simply communicating the logical proposition